Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and talk to you all today about the AI bio risk space. This is the talk I gave at ISMB 2026 on how AI accelerates biological discovery, but are we ready for the risks? Most of us entered biology because we wanted to understand life, improve health, restore ecosystems, or solve important problems. I know I certainly did. But as our capabilities grow, it becomes increasingly important to ask not only what can we build, but also what could happen once whatever we build leaves our hands. If we don't think about security and risk alongside capability, we can't be confident that the systems we build will only do the good that we intend. Today, AI is helping scientists to predict structures, design proteins, and reason across biological data at extraordinary speed. AI-enabled biological design tools are being built, many using the public data infrastructure that was built using the Human Genome Project. But what happens when AI changes the functional role of biological information? As I was thinking about what I wanted to say to a room full of computational biologists building this future, I kept coming back to one idea. Your capabilities are growing incredibly quickly, but many of you haven't been in the habit of thinking about what could go wrong. Historically, that wasn't your job. Increasingly, I think it will be, not because anyone is being irresponsible, but because AI is simply changing the speed, scale, and composability of biological research. Maybe you didn't think biosecurity was something that applied to you, and I wonder, when you think about biosecurity, what comes to mind? For many people, this is the mental image of biosecurity: a sample from a lab, a sick animal in the wild, a patient in the hospital. That framework is essential, but now incomplete, since it was built for a world where the security concern was usually something coming from the living world that we had in most cases seen before. There were clearish lines about what was concerning and what was not concerning. We had a playbook. We also had categories of risk. Biosecurity was also fairly siloed. Not everybody needed to know about it. In some cases, information was purposefully protected from broad dissemination, for example, limiting the publication of technical details from high-risk pathogen research because of biosecurity concerns, called information asymmetry. And maybe these strategies worked okay, but what does biosecurity look like now? I suspect you may have seen headlines like these recently, and they can seem divisive and potentially far away. Some conclude that it's all hype, while others conclude catastrophe is inevitable. And on the surface, these examples can look very different. The one on the left from the New York Times is specifically about large language models and how frontier language models can increasingly assist with scientific reasoning, literature interpretation, and experimental planning, which changes who can do biology. It's no longer gatekept by expertise. In the middle, we have one about mirror biology. So this is, again, a kind of a future risk that is capabilities are building around now. So instead of being able to only have left-handed amino acids in proteins and right-handed sugars in DNA, as we see in native biology, engineering biology can now create mirror image molecules and perhaps one day mirror image life forms. And how are these mirror image molecules and life forms going to interact with the life that already exists? This is an unknown question. The third is about DNA synthesis screening. When you order synthesized DNA, before the order is processed, there's a biosecurity review that ensures that what the DNA synthesis company is producing is not something that we already know is dangerous. But with AI-enabled biological design tools expanding the design space of biology, it's no longer limited to what we've already seen. And so how can we evolve our defensive systems to catch up with our scientific capabilities? But what I want to talk to you about in this talk is that I don't think these are really three different stories. I think they are instead evidence of underlying change. And to understand that underlying change, first we're going to go back about 20 years into the advent of synthetic and engineering biology, where it changed the story such that biology is no longer only observed. It also became something that we design and build. Engineering biology isn't just about manipulating cells or DNA. It's fundamentally about engineering with information. Every design, build, test, learn cycle generates information, consumes information, and produces information. As AI becomes integrated into these workflows, it's not simply adding another tool, it's acting directly on the information that underlies modern biotechnology. So engineering biology changed what biological information meant. It became design information in addition to information that informs humans. And as this shift was happening, now AI is also making biology increasingly computational. Computational biology is not new. Of course, everybody in the ISCB community knows that. And many have spent years and careers computing over biological information. I don't think AI changes that, but what it does change is something a little subtler. Biological knowledge is increasingly becoming embodied in computational models. Contemporary models don't simply encode biological information, they encode biological capability that's encoded in the information. They can predict, they can reason, they can generate, they can plan, and increasingly they can orchestrate. That is fundamentally a different role for biological information than one that we've previously seen. So engineering biology changed what biological information meant, and AI is changing what biological information can do. So let's think about what that can look like. Biological research used to exclusively be a pipeline, end to end. It had a start and it had an end and multiple steps in between. And in some cases, it still is. But in addition to that pipeline model, it's also increasingly becoming a continuous learning cyber digital physical system where information no longer simply describes biology. Information is part of this entire circle. It increasingly creates new capabilities in biology in the form of feedback loops. This is another illustration of the concept of how the ecosystem is changing and more pieces of it are becoming connected. And this isn't meant to be a complete architecture, nor is it meant to describe every situation. Every situation is going to be totally unique. It's a way of seeing. And one of the things I want to highlight is that none of these components, the biological data, researchers, experimental workflows, cloud infrastructure, laboratory automation, et cetera, none of these are new. But what is new is that AI is increasingly connecting them. And from those connections, capability is emerging. So the novelty comes from the relationships and capability emerges from the coordination, which means that we also need to think about what capabilities are going to emerge when these components interact, whether that's for the intended purposes or unintended purposes. And then what are the capabilities of this connected ecosystem, both intended and unintended? So up until this point, we've talked about how AI is changing biology, but there's a much more fundamental way to see it. AI is changing the nature of biological information itself in at least three ways. I think these three transformations explain almost every AI biosecurity headline we've seen over the past 2 years. And these aren't separate risks. They're three changes in relationships. They're changes in the relationship between information and capability, between expertise and action, and between digital and living systems. These changing relationships create many of the new opportunities and many of the new security challenges that we face. These transformations also increase the scale and speed at which biological capabilities emerge and propagate. And overall, underlying all three of these examples reflect how AI changes the functional role of biological information. So let's dig into each of these three a little bit more deeply. So biology has always depended on information. That is not new here. DNA is information. Experimental data are information. Protocols and papers are information. And those information used to be fed to humans who would then act on the information. But what AI is changing is that the functional role of information, instead of simply informing scientists, biological information is increasingly enabling AI systems to generate designs, to generate plans, predictions, and recommendations. Information itself is becoming a more active participant in the discovery process. Another change that we're seeing is the move from local to distributed. Historically, expertise has lived primarily in experienced researchers, kind of centralized in these individuals. Increasingly, portions of that expertise are becoming embedded in software, models, APIs, and autonomous agents. They're becoming reusable, repeatable, scalable, and broadly accessible. capability is becoming distributed across socio-technical systems rather than concentrated in individuals. This second transformation from local to distributed is changing where expertise lives and how widely its benefits or risks can spread. Just anecdotally, we're already seeing hints of this type of local to distributed capacity beyond biology. A recent field study interviewing former Boko Haram members, threat actors from a violent extremist organization, described how AI was being used for planning, logistics, technical troubleshooting, and organizational training within this VEO, violent extremist organization. And whether every reported capability generalizes is not the important point, but the important point is that AI capability is becoming organizational capability and is rapidly spreading. The third transformation is perhaps the most consequential, although I want to caution that this is not being seen as rapidly in academia as it is in the private sector. So you may not have encountered this yet, but I do think it is perhaps one of the most consequential that we really need to design around. So digital biological information are increasingly influencing the physical biological world directly. AI-generated plans can now be executed through laboratory automation, DNA synthesis, robotics, and manufacturing. They can direct the information itself through the AI-mediated tools can directly affect experiments, products, patients, and even environmental systems. The distance between information and physical biology is shrinking, and it crosses a single cyber-digital physical boundary. I want to note that this fast-tracking the digital to physical transition is not yet being seen everywhere in research, not yet. The private sector is definitely moving faster on this, so you might not think this applies to you, yet the tools that you build and share openly could be used in these increasingly automated digital to physical ways. Information increasingly is reaching the digital world without as many human translation steps. So the functional role of biological information has changed in this AI bio world. The traditional questions that we have asked in the past around security are, is the data set secure? Is the model secure? Is the lab secure? These questions still matter, but they're no longer enough. Not now that biological capability is emerging through relationships between information, AI, people, laboratories, and living systems. The security question therefore becomes relational. How do these components connect? How does the information flow? How are capabilities distributed? And what new capabilities are emerging as a result of these connections and this information? When does digital action become biological action? These are the questions for the next generation of biosecurity. In this model, if information changes, capability changes. And if capability changes, security has to change. And the question I've been asking myself is, where should security live? Where do we think about risk? There's no one place to think about risk here. There's no obvious solution for biosecurity review right here. And there's also no security playbook. We have to build one. As I was getting a peer review of this talk by a colleague who evaluates security in widely used bioinformatics tools that are open source, they shared with me that they've repeatedly demonstrated ways of poisoning models that are extraordinarily difficult to detect and remove. Clandestine, unfindable, irreversible poisoning is the language that they used. The point is not the specific attack or the specific model poisoning. It's that once systems become so connected, failures can propagate through relationships just as capabilities do. Just one example of where society has grappled with this question is in the autonomous weapons space. The Department of Defense didn't simply ask, is this weapon safe? They asked a deeper systems question of how do we maintain meaningful human control as autonomy increases? That shifts the focus from evaluating individual technologies to understanding how control is maintained across an entire socio-technical system. I want to note that this system of control for autonomous weapons was first established by the DoD in 2003, so 23 years ago. And what I'm trying to argue here is that it is beyond time for us to establish that same kind of system of control and understanding in AI-enabled biology. We need to be able to understand where control lives in AI-enabled biological ecosystems and how we know when we're losing it. When I first started thinking about this talk, I was most familiar with biosecurity and cybersecurity and the intersection of these, which is called cyber biosecurity by some. But there are actually three security disciplines converging, and AI-enabled biology sits at the convergence of three security disciplines of biosecurity, cybersecurity, and AI safety. Until recently, these communities mostly worked in parallel, but AI-enabled biology is a forcing function, creating systems that span all three, which means that none of us can solve these problems alone. No one security discipline has all of the tools it needs to create solutions for understanding where security and how security can operate in AI bio ecosystems. So it's no wonder that this feels complicated. With AI-enabled biology sitting at the intersection of three security disciplines, obviously we're going to have to think about how these disciplines are going to work together to solve these problems. And a lot of serious work is already happening here. An incredibly diverse ecosystem has emerged and is continuing to emerge, and there are a lot of really great leaders and thinkers thinking about these problems. They include research organizations, frontier AI companies, operational biosecurity groups, governments, shared infrastructure partners. They're all working on different parts of the problem. But the point that I want to make is that you are now part of this ecosystem. If you are working at all with AI-enabled biology, you now need to think about yourself as working in security. Every time you publish a model, release a package, expose an API, or build a workflow, you are shaping the capabilities that someone else may compose. AI-enabled biological research is generating new capabilities, and biosecurity is about ensuring that those capabilities can continue to serve life. Because of the distributed, fast, and relational nature, everyone who interacts with these systems becomes an important sensor for the overall risk space. It's like you, the computational biologist, using and developing and publishing these tools are the interoceptive nervous system for AI bio risk. As computational biologists, you likely already understand the concept of emergence. No single gene explains a phenotype. Phenotypes emerge from interactions among genes, proteins, cells, environments, and time. Security is also an emergent property. In AI biosecurity, no single model, dataset, lab, or policy determines whether the system is safe. Security emerges from the relationships. Learning systems become increasingly capable by building and acting on models, but greater capability is not by itself the objective. A learning system can become extraordinarily good at pursuing an objective that no longer serves the living system it exists within. That's why AI-enabled biology isn't simply about making our models more capable. It's about ensuring that the objectives, the feedback loops, and the governance surrounding those models remain aligned with supporting life. So based on this convergence speed and the way the role of biological information is changing, I've been thinking about how we can study the theory of control in AI-enabled biological research. I'm calling this framing relational biosecurity. If risk emerges from relationships between people and AI, models and data, labs and clouds, institutions and incentives, if this is true, then governance has to attend to these relationships, not just the objects. I'm not here to give you all the answers. They don't exist, but I think there are many questions we can start asking, like what new capabilities emerge when AI, biological data, laboratories, cloud infrastructure, and people become deeply connected? Thinking back to the headlines from the earlier slide, they were all about interactions, capabilities that arise from new interactions in this now connected ecosystem. The headlines are examples of failure modes that have either occurred or could occur in this new AI bio connected ecosystem. So what can we do about it? How can we apply this relational biosecurity lens? This is what I'm proposing. AI-enabled biology is a network of relationships, and each relationship poses research questions. Each relationship can be studied. There are some big questions we need to address collectively, like what kinds of relationships should exist in AI-enabled biological ecosystem so that the whole system tends towards supporting life? What relationships are most suitable for governance to control risk? Relationships, importantly, have qualities like direction, feedback, permissions, incentives, and temporal dynamics. These qualities can be analyzed and modeled to answer specific research questions like, how do we detect and assess emergent capability? How can we describe the possibility space of AI-composed biological tools? What constitutes controllable workflow orchestration? How do we design AI that notices risky compositions? Relationships can be measured and relationships can be governed, and each relationship pair becomes a research domain. Human and AI, you can think about trust, calibration, and agency. The relationship between AI and biological data, we think about provenance, metadata, and representation. In AI and physical biology, you think about authorization, monitoring, and containment. Organization to organizational relationships, governance and information sharing. Human to human, culture and training. And infrastructure touches everything. And then security, our security posture, emerges from understanding these relationships. Every AI-enabled biological system is optimizing for something. The question isn't whether values enter the system. They already do. The question is, whose values, where, and how visible are they? So all of these relationships, trying to understand and make sense of all of them is absolutely a task that we can use AI to help with. AI is not only a source of risk, it can become a participant in discovery. It can also be a participant in security. It can help us sense and give feedback that helps humans notice unusual workflows, hidden assumptions, risky combinations, or drift toward unintended capabilities. It's going to be up to everybody building AI-enabled biological tools, everyone using AI agents in their biological research and development, and everyone managing complex workflows to think like a security professional. It will be up to you to consider how these relationships, not each tool alone, and how the entire ecosystem should be protected from harmful use, intentional or not. Every mature complex system depends on distributed sensing. This community of researchers building AI-enabled biological tools is becoming a part of the sensing system for AI-enabled biology. And I'm proposing that we start doing research that pushes this field forward and helps us to understand how we build these relationships in a way that support life. Every engineering discipline eventually developed a science of safety alongside a science of capability. AI-enabled biology is reaching that moment. My hope is that you recognize security as becoming everyone's job, and that many of the people in this room and listening to this talk will help build that science. The goal is not to fear these tools, but that you become more thoughtful, that when you build something powerful, you also ask, what else might this enable? What assumptions am I making? What relationships make this system safe or unsafe? What values can I embody in this information model? I ask you to consider what you're optimizing for. The relationships determine what the system optimizes for. In terms of what to optimize for, I would argue that in addition to the characteristic that you're designing for, like binding strength or specificity, that we should also be optimizing for supporting life. You are now participating in biology at an extraordinary moment. The future will be determined by how wisely we choose to build it. If these ideas resonate with you, I would love to keep building this community together. Cybersecurity did not become a mature field because one organization solved it. It matured because practitioners began sharing failures, best practices, and norms. AI-enabled biology needs the same kind of community. I hope that you'll continue to ask questions about the relationships in your work, build AI that strengthens human judgment rather than replaces it, and think deeply about whether or not what you're building could be used to support life or not. I will end here and leave you with these references, and thank you very much for your attention.